My name is Christa. I'll be the host today, and I am joined by Amy Dabbs.
Hello.
Give it up. So Amy, I know a few things about you as a person, as a producer. I know that you have your own record label called Traxx. You are a resident at Renate. Tell me a bit more about yourself as a producer.
So I only really started taking producing seriously when I got to Berlin, and that's actually one of the reasons that I moved here. I'd released a couple of things in like 2014, 2015, but I didn't really dedicate myself to it very much. And I realised how much work it actually takes to be good enough to release the quality music that I wanted to release. I wasn't ready to do that when I got to Berlin. So I kind of opened up Ableton. I'm like, right, I'm in Berlin, I'm going to go network, I'm going to go to all the clubs, see what's going on. I'm going to sit down and write some EPs and then release them, and it's all going to be a magical plan with, exactly what I want.
It's perfect, it's going to happen just like that.
Yeah, easy peasy. But actually, it was a lot more difficult than I thought, and the road to actually getting where I am now was extremely rocky and difficult.
And you came to Berlin by way of which other countries?
So I grew up in London and lived there for most of my life, and then I moved to Singapore in 2015. So I work in advertising in my day job, so I moved there with that, and it was great. I was working full time. I was DJing a lot. I had a residency there, but I wasn't really paying attention to my craft, and I was just out too much, and I didn't really. Also, because it's summer all the time, I was never sitting at home indoors when it was 30 degrees. I was sitting by the pool and being like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. And nothing really came of it production-wise. I got a lot of great experience playing in Asia and made a good kind of network of people over there. But in terms of getting down and grafting, it didn't really make me work at this, and this takes an inordinate amount of time. So I think I need to be away from the sun to do that.
Yeah, I get that. So your way into being interested in being a producer was through DJing?
Yeah.
And what were some moments that led you to want to be a producer yourself? Was it feeling something on the dance floor and being I would love to be able to create this for people, or what happened there?
Yeah, it was definitely some of that, and there was this kind of calling inside of me, and having written a couple of things, and they weren't big things. One came out on a VA, and I wrote an EP, but it's not something that I look back on and feel embarrassed by, but it definitely wasn't my best work, because I didn't really have the skill set to do the things I really wanted to do. But in terms of wanting to produce, I had this kind of just need to do it, and I had ideas, and I'd lie in bed and melodies would come into my head, and I'd think about even if I'd written that track, I would do that there, and I would change that, and I'd add a piano bit in that bit. And I kind of had all these creative ideas, but I didn't really have the ability to translate them. And that's what I found really frustrating when I moved to Berlin, because I kind of had this expectation that I just open up Ableton and I'd just be able to do it, and it became very difficult when I wasn't able to do that.
Right, so you spent this time in London and in Singapore, and you DJ'd and you made some of your first tracks. Then you moved to Berlin. What happened in that first year of being here?
A lot of partying happened. I was in Berghain every weekend. I was at every club. I was ringleading, going to every club, and I didn't have any friends when I first got here. So I wanted to go out, meet some mates, see what was going on in the scene. I didn't really need to do that for a whole year, but I was in every single club all weekend, and then I was kicking off about, I'm not getting any gigs and I haven't written anything. It's well, actually, you're not sleeping any time soon. You need to just get on with it.
I feel a year is quite short almost for that phase, so I wouldn't kick yourself too hard.
It was a bit like the purge after living in Singapore, which is obviously very controlled.
Very, very conservative in terms of its laws around queerness and drug use, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it became a bit of a living my 18-year-old life as soon as I got here, which maybe there's a bit of market research that I needed to do, but actually I think I took it to an extreme level, and then I was getting pissed off that I wasn't actually progressing. And if I realised that if I wanted to be on the other side of the decks in the clubs that I was going to, that I needed to actually start to work and not just expect things to come to me. It was slightly complacent to assume that things would just fall into my lap, especially here, because everyone is in music, everyone DJs, everyone's a producer. You need a CV from, gold standard to give to someone and be okay, do you want to consider me?
It's easy to mistake that though, right? You can come to Berlin and be oh, it's the place where all the producers and DJs go, therefore there's a lot of work that's available, and then you go, oh, every weekend has several lineups rivaling a world-class music festival. Where do I fit into this?
Yeah. And how do I even get anyone's attention? I didn't know anybody, there was no inroads there, I hadn't released very much, so I couldn't talk myself up, or I wasn't getting played on radio or having big playlist that got my numbers up so people knew about my profile. So it was definitely starting from a lot less than I kind of thought, and maybe that was a little bit of my mistake to come here and think that, I've played loads of places, I'm DJing for 20 years, I can do this, I can do that, but actually you need to be able to show a little bit more than that. And I did want to learn how to produce, but going clubbing every weekend was not conducive to that.
So was there a sort of moment of reckoning that you remember that was like, that's it, I need to snap out of this and really hit the books? Like what was that moment like?
Most Tuesday mornings actually, but
it's never Monday, it's Tuesday.
It's still working my day job on Tuesdays. So I had been in Berlin, I moved in November 2018. Don't move here in winter when you've just lived on the equator for 4 years. Going into the greyest part of the year. And then by 2019, so a year later, I had this like kind of re-evaluation moment where I'm like, what am I doing? Like I'm just like, why? I'm not doing anything, I'm just going out. And yeah, it's fun, but that fun is just, cyclical at this stage. So I met a producer called Eloise, who used to live in Berlin, for lunch, and I'd seen her play. She's amazing, she's Australian. She's moved back to Australia now. And I just said, look, what's going on? I think I'd seen her in a couple of places, and I'm like, what's the secret? And she's like, you need to produce. Are you producing? I'm like, well, I can kind of produce, but I'm not really sure if what I'm making is any good. So she's like, get your head down, go and start writing. And as I was leaving that lunch, she turned and said to me, she's like, oh, I've actually got a space coming up in my studio. There's like 4 of us and one person's leaving. We will share. It's in Bergen Keys. Do you want to take the space? So I was like, actually, yeah. And it was quite affordable because there's 4 people splitting the rent. It's a very tiny little basement. And I was like, yeah, okay. So I took it, I thought, right, this is the answer to our problems. Now I've got a studio, I'll be able to write now. Got in there, still couldn't write. I was like looking at Ableton, like now look at that. And if I looked at that when I first started out, I'd just been like, I don't have a clue what's going on.
Just go cross-eyed and leave.
Yeah, or like something would stop working and I'm like, I don't even know which of these 40,000 buttons to press. And I used to sit in my studio and I used to cry. I remember one day I sat and I cried on top of my mat, just hysterical crying. I'm like, what am I doing? This has been a complete disaster. Got no mates here apart from party friends. Can't write music, haven't released anything. I was literally about to go home. I actually lost my day job during COVID as well, which exacerbated how...
This all happened during COVID?
Yeah, this was just before COVID, but I was going through the meltdown as it came in. And then I'm like, right, you know what? I'm not even going to go and sit in the studio and be miserable because I started to associate it with feeling like a failure. So I just stopped going. And I'm like, right, I'm going to sit and watch YouTube tutorials of every single thing that I don't understand. What is compression? Why am I putting it on everything? What's reverb? What are these buttons that I'm ignoring? What are all these like dials that I have no clue about? I'm like moving them around and okay, you can say the ear is God, right? So you can do a lot of things by ear, but if you don't fundamentally understand what you're doing, it's just torture. And I see some of my mates learning and I'm like, get through this bit, this is the worst bit, but you can get out the other side. And for 3 months, I sat there watching some dude go, thank you for my 3,000 followers, and just get to the point.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Oh my God. And after that period, I went back into the studio, and all of the things I was telling you about when I used to sit there and be like, I would write this, and this is an idea for a melody I had. Suddenly I was able to translate what was in my head out of the speakers and through Ableton, and that was like the biggest like step change in how I was feeling, whether I thought this was a complete disaster moving to Berlin, and I was able to write, and it just flowed out like it had always been inside of me and needed to just come out. And I wrote a whole EP, I sent it to my mates, and they were like, this is very different from the stuff you were sending, which is their nice way of saying the last stuff was fucking awful. And then I sent it to Lobster Theremin, who we won't go into too much here, but they signed it immediately, and then I wrote a jungle EP. So the first one was house, and I was like, I want to see if I can do this, because I thought it was like both kinds of music. And then they signed that as well. So that gave me, from spiraling and like being literally about to quit and run back to some, nice job, working 5 days a week. I still work the same job 3 days a week to pay my rent. But I was like worrying about everything, and that kind of changed my perception and my confidence significantly.
I think there's so many aspects of your sort of origin story as a producer that are very relatable, like whether you're a music producer or you're just in another field, like the confidence in yourself and the optimism, and then having that all crash down on you. But that moment of perseverance that you went through is something that actually not everybody gets through. So like kudos to you for doing that. And now here you are, you're in Berlin, you're a resident at one of the biggest clubs, you're playing regularly, you're playing at this festival tomorrow evening.
Yes, indeed.
And today you've brought for us one of the tracks that you've written. It's for a song called Crush.
That's right.
And we're going to take a look at this session file and go into some of your production techniques to learn more about the music and you as an artist.
Sure thing.
Can I get a quick show of hands from the audience who here makes music?
No, I've heard it. Sorry about that.
You've heard it. I want to ask both questions. Who here makes music? Do you make music with Ableton Live or another DAW? Yeah, cool. And who has heard this song? Crush. You have, I have. I thought to start, maybe we could just listen together to the track, start to finish, glow in its bright, housey energy, and then we can get into it.
Sure.
Let's do it.
Do you want to listen to the mastered one rather than this one?
No, let's do your session file. We're listening to, so this
All
is
right.
the pre-mastered Amy Dabbs mixed version. That one, it's like that clocked in at what, 6 minutes 40 seconds?
Yeah, I was getting PTSD actually. 50 channels.
Yeah, so there are a lot of elements to this music. First, let's zoom out and just talk about the composition itself. Can you tell me about this track and the way it kind of transforms in its playtime?
Yeah, so when I start things in different ways, like if I haven't got an idea, I quite often just write the rhythm track, like the drums. There's often a lot of things in my drums. So you've got a kick drum here, you've got a clap, you've got a rim beat, you've got lots of hi-hats, 3 types of hi-hats. I often put like a loop in on top of the stuff that I've written myself in MIDI, just to give it a bit of a rhythmic difference, and a lot of swing on all of the other elements I've written in drum rack. I'll sometimes start like that. But this one I started using a sample. I think maybe I got it from Splice, or I often buy packs from like Loop Masters. I'm not a particularly skillful musician when it comes to theory, so I need like something to like whet my appetite, and I'm like, right, let's go. This loop here called Roads, if anyone's listened to any of my other tracks, there's quite often a Roads in there, is how I started the song. And if it's a loop that you've got from somewhere else, I'm noticing quite a lot, like especially from places like Splice, you're hearing a lot of repetition, people are using the same things, and there's a lot of really good stuff on Splice, and there's a lot of really not good stuff, and I think the good stuff's getting grabbed. So what I like to try and do is to like add in, and we'll probably talk about this in a second, like little bits of differentiation, so it doesn't sound like a copy-paste of a loop. But that's how I started, and it's in a major key, and that chord progression is really nice, and it's kind of very chirpy. And then the second part of the track, the mood changes, you probably noticed it becomes more minor, but it's still in the same key. And it gives a feeling of having like 2 sections to the track. And when I was writing it, I wanted to make sure that when it changed from one section to another, the biggest thing I think about when I'm writing a piece of music is that I don't want people to feel like, whoa, like where did that come from? Everything needs to be like a baton being handed over. So if you're going to change stuff, if you're going to start with, I don't know, like a piano, and then it's going to become a completely different sound, like a big pad and that's minor and that's major, you don't want it to just be abrupt. So when you're on the dance floor, people are like, should we go and get a drink? What the hell is this? So having some consistent elements through the track. So one of the things that I found was like a baton, if you like, is this little saxophone sound here. If we can just see if we can play it. Well, it's kind of like half vocal, half saxophone. It's got a really like old house kind of sound, which works with that, but it also works in the darker part of the track. So there needs to be little consistent things that remind the listener, not that the listener's consciously thinking, well, there's no things that remind me of the beginning of the song, but just little things that like make the ear find it easy to transition when you're doing lots and lots of things. And this track has like 50 channels in it, so I'm doing loads of things, but I need to make sure that there's no abrupt moments, and sometimes I'll write the whole thing and then I'll have to go back in and like, what's the stitching that holds this material together so it doesn't feel like 2 tracks that have been shoved into one project.
And so when you wrote this and you realized, okay, now we're going somewhere and we're going somewhere new, there are other elements in this kind of breakdown. I think I heard strings in there.
There's so many strings.
Right? Did the string layering sort of happen when you realized that you were entering sort of a new dimension of the music?
Kind of. So these strings here they're from a sample. They're just like an ensemble of strings. Again, they don't sound that great at the moment. It's quite scratchy sounding, but they're very nice. Like there's a very nice like kind of warmth to them. But what I always do, I would say almost every single one of my tracks has got Ableton's MIDI strings in, because you can keep playing the same loop, and if you have the strings changing in the background, and a lot of old house does this, I certainly can't take credit for this, it just keeps the listener engaged and it keeps your ear engaged. So this has got more strings than I've probably ever put in any track. So these soft strings are just written in Ableton, I think it's like synthetic string or some heavily sidechained to the kick, you can hear. Otherwise it'd just be... So having that like... That's a really important thing. When you've got so many elements, it can just sound so muddy if they're all just playing. I'll put things in groups. I'm about to get arrested. And I'll sidechain often. I don't know if I've done it here, but I'll often sidechain either the channel to the kick. Again. So on this one, the compressor here, again, just Ableton's compressor, sidechain to the kick, which is what it's going wah, 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 in line with the kick. I've got some reverb on there as well. I've got another set of strings which are called scratchy strings, which are running also sidechained, you can hear. Sometimes it's better, and I haven't done this here, to put the sidechaining on the group so that they're all sidechaining together, but I've done it individually because I like making it difficult for myself. So you've got two sets of strings. The other thing that's critical that I really can't urge you to do enough is pan stuff, because I've got a lot of things. If you think about, again, my mixed out engineer taught me this. If you think about a string quartet, you've got like a double bass, you've got a cello, you've got a viola, you've got a violin, and they're all playing at different frequencies. I've got like 17 violins, and you can't, if they're all playing at once, you can't even hear them. So you need to actually work out what needs reverb to be pushed back into the mix. But panning left and right, as simple as that sounds, actually is a huge tool in your artillery of trying to finish a track. But make sure when you listen back, because sometimes you can get carried away and go back and listen to it on your best headphones and your worst headphones. Listen to it on iPhone headphones and be like, okay, why is my right ear aching and the left one's quiet? And go and recalibrate all the panning to make sure that you've got an even balance throughout the track. I would say never pan your kick. And the percussion needs to be pretty stable. If you've got lots of hats, you can pan them left and right, but the main elements, kicks and claps, kind of need to be down the centre because it can make you feel like you're going mad. You can do small panning, but not a lot, because you need some kind of structure, especially if you've got that many elements. But yeah, the strings, they're fundamental to changing the mood, so quite often you can see here they're going up, down, then they carry on being consistent when other things are changing, because you don't want to change too much at once. From a sound design perspective, when a lot of things are going on, the ear's trying to work out which thing to pay attention to, and if everything's changing at once, it's like trying to watch 10 different football matches. Like, you can't work out which one you need to be focusing on. So that's another thing that I learned the hard way.
Now that you've taken us through the plain and simple brass arpeggiation, as well as the way that you've balanced the strings, can we listen to just that build-up part to hear it all together?
Sure thing. This bit.
Would you all like that?
Yeah.
Hear the drop one more time?
Let's go.
Turn off.
I love your unafraid use of the drop sounds. Like boom.
Well, UK rave girl, mate.
Yeah.
Grew up in car parks. Yeah, that drop sound, I think it's in every single, not always in the car park, by the way, just raving. The drop sound, it's such a basic sound, but it sounds really good when you want to make a big impact. It's like a proper old rave kind of moment. So I really like putting lots of effects in and lots of crashes and hisses. I mean, you don't have to do this. If you want to make a completely different style of music, this is almost gratuitous because there's so many bits and pieces going on. But I want this track to be like bang, 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 and there's lots of things that the crashes need to compete with. So I need to like point out moments where it's like a big moment in the track. So there's quite a few drops, swooshes and hisses and stuff. but yeah, that's one of the fun bits actually, is adding all these things in.
Totally. And then is there anything from the second half of the track that really speaks to you? You take it, like you said, you go from a major key into a minor in key.
Yeah.
And was this originally intended to be sort of like an outro to the track that just extended?
Yeah, I mean, normally my tracks are quite short, like I normally write like 5-minute tracks, and this ended up being pretty long. And when Heist signed it, actually, they were like, are you sure that you want the vocal to come in that late? But I actually said yeah, because I spent ages like teasing it. But I didn't really plan to have this second section of the track. And when I decided to have it, I decided to keep the big vocal where she kind of like lets loose at the end, right until the end, because she's kind of built up. She's like, give me something, and then she's like, I feel like in my head at least, she's telling someone off. She's like, just, you know, be better to me. So that kind of speaks to me, I would say.
When you're working in the field of electronic music, I think maybe to somebody outside of music, it could be perceived as less narrative or less of like a storytelling device as, say, a Motown track that's got some big, beautiful, heart-aching kind of story behind it. When you write your music, are you often thinking in a narrative sense? Are you feeling a story behind the music?
It's a really good question. Sometimes, yes. And sometimes it doesn't have to have lyrics for me to have that narrative. And also, sometimes it doesn't matter if anyone else knows that narrative, but those emotions are feeding what I've written. I've got a track coming out later in summer that's called It's Not Me, It's You, and someone had just like really wronged me. And I was just like, ugh! And I took all that energy and I just wrote this track. And it's not sad or like depressing, and there's no like fuck you lyrics in it, but it was like the power that was in me came into the song. So that narrative is like a silent narrative. There's other times, like a track that's coming out on He, She, They in June called Love at the Afters, and it's someone telling a story of like, you know, I knew this was always on the cards, and like, you know, now let's just be honest about how we feel about each other. And this person's singing to a girl, in my head at least, and she's like, I've got expectations, you know. And those are the two lyrics that are in the track, so maybe it's easier for the listener to like understand that narrative. But I don't really mind if people don't go away going, well, you know, I went on a whole journey, like I watched a film. Like I just want people to enjoy it. And if it's got powerful moments, everything's subjective, and you know, it might mean one thing to someone, nothing to someone else, and a great deal to someone else. But like, as long as people enjoy it, then that's my job done, as far as I'm concerned.
But it also sounds like if you have a vision in your head of what's happening, that can help direct how you're writing, right?
Yeah, totally.
That's really nice. Can you remember the like first time you played this track out?
Yeah, I can. I played it at Sisyphos. It was I think it was only my second ever time playing there, and I hadn't played it out. I get so nervous of playing my own songs because I don't know if they're good. And I don't, even if they've been signed, this little voice that's like, oh, will it even go with the rest of your music? Is there. And I'm like, what if you play it and it's just awful? And like, what if everyone just leaves? And you know, then promoters like, what was that terrible track? And like, this ridiculous anxiety spiral which comes into my head, a lot of people's heads when they're writing music. And I'm like, right, it's been signed to a label that I love. Like, if it was that bad, surely. And I played it and people just started going mental, and they were like screaming at me, like screaming, cheering, and like I just burst into tears behind the decks. I've never had that feeling ever, like so significantly. And I think it was also exaggerated by the more upset I was getting, people just like, yeah, and screaming, and it was just really, really nice. And it kind of, again, I need those little confidence moments. Like, I'm not a particularly confident person. I'm not sitting in the studio like, oh, I'll just write another track today. Like, I sit there sometimes, I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, is this any good? Do you want to spend any more time on this? And one quote that I've written in all of my studio notebooks, because I'm always making notes when I come back in and listen back to my songs and like, did I do any good last night at 3 a.m. or not? One quote, and it was from watching all of those tutorials earlier on, was from Claude Von Stroke, and it said, every good track I've ever written was a shit track that I didn't give up on. That relentlessness is the key. It's not skills, it's not like, you know, having the best equipment or having a synthesizer or having a studio. It's like fucking grafting and just believing that this track is in there somewhere. And even if the track that you finish up with is nothing like the track that you started with, that's okay. Even if you spent like 4 hours or 4,000 hours compressing your snare and you throw that snare in the bin, that's okay too. Like, let go of stuff if it doesn't work. This has changed so many times and gone bigger, smaller. Probably was a jungle track at one point. But then you're just like, okay, just keep going. And eventually you'll be like, right, there are tracks that are just dead in the water, but sometimes that happens and you spend God knows how long on them and you just have to be like, right, I'm now calling it. But other times you push through and it works, so you just got to keep going.
It's resonant to your path as a producer. The
Yeah.
moment that you pushed through when you were crying in the studio, going from crying in the studio to crying in the club when you're playing your own track. So that's a beautiful journey.
That's my next EP name.
Yeah. We have time for a couple audience questions for Amy if anybody would like to ask. Go ahead.
Could you please tell me what is your most proudest track? What's your proudest moment where you're like, fuck yeah, this was brought tears to your eyes. What was your very first? Second question would be, what do you do to get past like writer's block, creative block, music block? How would you teach people who are trying to learn music to get past that block where you're like, I can't get past this anxiety module, I can't get past learning? How would you teach people to get past that like block moment? Two questions.
Okay, so the first one's easy because it was the first proper track that I wrote, which is called Girl Like Me, which has got a Motown sample. And because I'm the daughter of a Northern Soul DJ, I grew up with my dad playing Motown all the time. And I've got a definitely cleared sample in there. We won't say who it is. But yeah, it's that track. When I finished it, I was like, oh my God, I'm excited about this. I stood up out of my chair in the studio and was like, I can't believe I've made this. And I've never felt like that before. And it wasn't like a, wow, this is awesome. It was more like, this is something that I wanted to be able to hear when I've written a song. So that was probably the proudest moment, like the first, like I've done something that I really wanted to make and I didn't realise I could do it myself. That was after the period of learning. The other question is really difficult because I still get that now and I still have those days where I'm just like, fuck this. Sometimes I've got better at just going home now because otherwise you can sit there sometimes and you're like, this is making me feel miserable and rubbish. The other tip I have, I work on quite a lot of tracks at once and that's why this took me, I don't know, 6 months, 9 months. I'll put it down, I'll come back to it, do I still like it? That's a good way of knowing sometimes. The other thing is to just like not worry about what you're trying to make, because I've actually started tracks that have started for a jungle EP and they've ended up being a house track that I don't really have a place for at that point in my life. I'm trying to write to fulfill this EP that I need to do that is jungle. But I'm like, actually, this isn't that, but I'm going to do something else. I'm just going to keep doing something until I work out if I like this. And not worrying. You're not going to have to play it to anyone. If it's shit, just like keep going. One of the biggest things that helped me was ECLA Collective, which is a female trans and non-binary music collective that used to run a workshop every other week. Hopefully we get funding again next year. But you just turn up and they give you samples and you have 2 hours to write a song and you have to play that song back to everybody. And the fear of God that you get about having to make an arrangement and, you know, all the things you need to do at that time is, that pressure can make you finish something, but actually then you realise you can finish something and you take that razor sharp decision making. You have like, yes or no, does it work, does it not? Throw it in the bin then. That's something that's helped me a lot in the studio because I'm like relentlessly plugging on with something that doesn't work. I'm now like, that's the problem, get rid of it. Even if it's the main bit, throw it in the bin. Take the piano out, have the rest of just look at the percussion and put something completely different in and just see what happens then, rather than like pursuing something that isn't working.
Thank you for your great questions. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
Since you started releasing music, are you constantly changing the style and the vibes of your music? And if so, are you happy with that, or would you rather have like a signature sound, you know, that you keep having in your track and maybe people can recognize?
That's a great question actually, because I'm releasing quite a lot of different genres, so it's hard to have a consistent sound, I guess. There are lots of consistent production techniques and things that are in my songs, so even that stuttery sound that I showed you earlier, that appears in my jungle tracks as well as in my house tracks. So I wouldn't say, I think when you're starting to write more and more, you kind of end up having a bit of a style without trying to make a style. And there are some consistencies between my house and my up-tempo stuff that weren't there on purpose, but it's like you learn your techniques and then those kind of filter into everything else you're doing. I don't really mind if I don't have a signature style, as long as my songs are kind of getting traction and people are enjoying them, buying them, playing them. I don't think it's necessarily important. I think some people definitely have more of a staple, like, okay, you can hear it and like that's a Palms track song or whatever it is, but sometimes if you're enjoying producing, don't try to put yourself into a lane. One of my first tracks that I wrote was picked up by a special request, so Paul Wolford in a competition. And that was a jungle track, and I was honoured because he's obviously like an absolute legend. And I said to him, like, what should I do? Because I'm making house and I'm making jungle, do I need an alias? And he was like, no, just write stuff that you want to write. Be yourself, write what comes out, and if you're liking the stuff that you're making, that's what is your style. You don't need to say, I'm going to make hard techno, I'm going to make, you know, Detroit techno, or whatever. You need to just have fun in the studio, and sometimes it isn't fun. When you're learning, it's actually awful, but you'll get through that, and then now I get excited about writing stuff. But I never try to go, does it sound like Amy? Like, I'm just like, does it sound good?
Okay, we have time for one more question. Go ahead.
What what was the technique called you presented? Something like working or you?
Warping.
Warping. Can you
Warp-
spell it?
WARPING.
Warping. Okay.
Yeah.
It comes up when you import a sample into your Ableton project. You'll see at the bottom here. Sorry, I can't make it much bigger, which is a bit annoying. You'll see here you've got warp mode. So this is on Pro. So if you've got a melody, a vocal, pianos, all that kind of stuff, Pro makes it less scratchy, to put it in the only way that I know how. And Beats is the way that you would warp if you imported a loop, and it will know exactly where the transients are, and it will make sure that every kick drum falls on the right part of the bar. But if you want to fuck around and make it like an effect, you would put Beats mode onto, if I can actually hit it, onto a melody, and then you go to preserve an 1/8 of the bar or 16th of the bar, and then it will make it juttery. And that's where you get that kind of nice stuttering effect that we looked at earlier.
Amy, thank you so much. And to
Thank you.
finish this talk, can you just tell us about your set tomorrow night? When are you playing here? Where are you playing? And what can people expect from you?
Yes, I'm really excited because I played last year at the first one and it was really, really sick. So I'm playing in summer. Is that what it's called? So the room summer? But
Yes,
Phoenix! At 1 a.m. So Saturday night, Sunday morning until 3 a.m. And I'm going to play like a really bouncy house set because I played a really fun gig at Watergate recently with Seb Zito, and I knew he kind of plays a lot of like really bouncy fun stuff, and I'm like, right, so I bought a whole like selection of things that are just like really just like big bassy stuff, big uplifting moments, maybe a bit of speed garage, there's often a bit of speed garage, but predominantly just like big fat house songs, so that's the plan.
Sounds gorgeous. Well, hopefully see some of you tomorrow night at Amy's set. And thank you so much for sharing Crush with us. It's a gorgeous track.
Thanks for having me.